Hello, my name is Gordy Hogue and this is Community Connections. Each of us has stories that help us to understand and to explain our world. I have been very fortunate to have met many interesting people who have had a positive, profound impact on our community and far beyond. People who have had incredible life experiences and fascinating stories that help us to better understand our world. And they help us to connect with each other. And Community Connections is about those people and about their stories. And I'm sure that you will enjoy meeting these amazing, amazing people as much as I have. Thank you. Enjoy. Good evening. My name is Gordy Hogue, and this is Community Connections. And I'm so delighted to have with us Bob Meek. Bob, welcome, and thank you for being a part of this little podcast.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you arrived in White Rock and what your life was like and the things your family was with and how things went from there?
Well, I was born in Winnipeg, but we only stayed in that area for a few years. I came to White Rock at the age of 3 in 1947. And I was the youngest of 5 children. So my mother and father and 5 children. And we were very poor and came, I think, without any employment. My father worked a little bit, but it was a bit of a challenge. Not so much for me, but for the older folks. We lived most of our time in the west side of White Rock. I ended up going to Ray Shepherd Elementary School just 1 year after it started. And I went to grade 1 there. And then we moved to the east side of White Rock. But the school district was very full, so they bused us back to Ray Shepherd. And I skipped grade 2, so I went in from grade 1 to grade 3. And then we moved to Holberg for grade 4 and lived in a very small village all on floats and went to a one-room school. So there was 4 of us in grade 4, a 19-year-old teacher, but it was a great year. And then moved back to White Rock, did grade 5. I skipped grade 6, so I did grade 5. And then 7 and 8 at Ray Shepherd, and then went to Sameness. And I enjoyed school, especially the high school. Ed Carlin came there in my second year, and my brother-in-law Claire Breen was already there, and I had brothers and sisters, so it was very easy for me. And I very much enjoyed it, and I was a good student, and so I didn't really work at it. I just played sports all the time. And as you know, most of my life in high school was spent playing basketball. And,
I remember my dad taking me to the 1961 finals where you were playing McGee, I think it was, in the finals.
That's right. Yeah, we lost to McGee in the finals. It was a difficult day because on the 5 of us on the starting team, 3 of us had worked all day in the Super Value store in White Rock before we went to play, and I personally was exhausted. And when it was all over, I remember standing there waiting for the awards, and the only thing I could say was, "Geez, I'm tired."
Well, one thing I remember about watching that game and then having a chance to play with you years later is you always had quick hands. That you were always in there and being able to steal the ball and block a ball, and so maybe that contributed to the career you went on to.
Maybe, yeah. I like playing defense, and I think I played defense fairly well.
Yeah.
So then I went to UBC, and I had by that time wanted to be a physician. The only physicians I knew were your dad, who I didn't know well, Tommy Blades, and Phil Nayrod. But I wanted to be a physician, and so I headed in that direction. And I didn't know if I would make it. My backup was to be a school teacher. But fortunately, I got into medical school in the last year of my science degree, and went to medical school in September '74. And medical school was tough. It wasn't so difficult intellectually as it was just a lot of work. And but
Is
I
that at UBC?
yeah, and so I went through there, and then in my second to last year, I did a clinical rotation for the 5 month summer we had over at Lionsgate Hospital, and there I got interested in surgery. And the surgeons were very good and interested and helpful, and so I got interested in surgery. And then I graduated and did fine, and went to the Royal Columbian, did a year internship there. Got married during that year.
To
Went on a
Betty Ann?
honeymoon. We got married to Betty Ann. Went on a honeymoon to uh, Louisville, Kentucky, New Orleans, Louisiana, all related to interviewing for residency programs. So, but we had a good trip. It was only 5 days because I had to go back to work. And then I took a residency program in Loma Linda, California, University of Loma Linda, and I did that for a year. But I didn't want to stay in the U.S. I didn't want anyway. But they sent me a draft notice in May of my or March or something of my year, and I thought, no, I don't want this, because the Vietnam War was on, and a bunch of my colleagues who were residents had just been picked off and gone to Fort Sam Houston, which was the surgical training area. So I came back to Canada and went into orthopedic surgery, and had some very good mentors there. F.P. Patterson was the leader, and he was great. And I enjoyed the four. I did 4 years in Vancouver, and I did 1 year in Belgium, and I enjoyed all 5 of them. I thought they were great. Um, and then when I finished, they asked me to stay on as a member of the faculty and a member of the staff at the Vancouver General, and so I started a trauma career. And I was the only one in Canada at the time who had devoted their whole orthopedic trauma practice or their whole orthopedic practice to trauma. And my plan was to develop it as a subspecialty of orthopedics, which was eventually successful, recruit other people. And we did that, and had a good, and still have a good division of orthopedic trauma there. And so I taught orthopedic trauma and did a little bit of research about it, but I taught it all over the world from 1974 or 75 through till my retirement in 2002. And of course, I did thousands of surgical cases and hundreds, if not more, educational events. And then I retired in 2002 from active clinical practice. But I had been thinking for quite a while about figuring out a better mechanism to fix a particular kind of fracture that involves the pelvis and the hip socket. And it's a bit of a complex series of interlocked bones, and they're curved in funny ways. And we didn't have a device which we could put inside the bone that would really, in my view, stabilize the bone strongly enough to prevent pain and get the patient up right away, and also to prevent deformity. So I started working on that, and I've been working on that ever since then. And it started off with just me and a few $100 out of my pocket, and then I got some engineering people involved, and then developed a little prototype. And then I went to the UBC and sort of talked to them about giving them the intellectual property, and they helped me with all the patenting and stuff. And then we got a grant, $300,000 grant from Genome BC, which we have nothing to do with genomics, but they gave us that. And then we got another grant for $600,000 from the Canadian Institute of Health Research. And I had with me all the time an engineer from the Genome Sciences Center named Robin Coop, who was a great help to me. And then a company from, I was hoping this would all be done in Canada and British Columbia, but a company from Seattle came up to UBC and they were looking for possible investments. They wanted to buy intellectual property that might turn into an investment. And they looked at our stuff and they liked it. So they put up a bunch of money, $1 million or more dollars. And that got us going. And then since then, it's been turned into several millions of dollars. And a small company, a startup company based in Seattle. And so we now have an invention, if you like, and two inventions really: an invention of a device and an invention of a surgical procedure. And we have full approval for it in the US for the Food and Drug Administration. And we've done 2 human patients in Canada at the Vancouver General. But this is still experimental. And we're still raising more money because, we want to expand. And then we're starting to do some patients in the US, could be as early as this week. So that's where we are with my intellectual life.
And you're on call for, is it University of Houston as well?
Well, I'm for the first few cases, I want to be there. And had COVID not come along, I would have physically been there. But because of COVID, it's not possible. And I'm quite happy not being there, actually. But I'm going to be virtually in the OR when the surgeons are doing the work. Now, I think most likely I'll just be sitting there observing because we have a very, very talented bunch of surgeons there. And the device and the equipment are all relatively easy for them to use. It's not so different from what they've been doing before. And in some ways they'll be better at it than I would. So I'm just going to be, standing by in case there's any questions or anything that I might be able to help them with. And partly to allay my own anxiety about it, I guess. Yeah.
So you've had and are still having a remarkable career. Were there some people who were inspirational for you? Some people who encouraged you along the way?
I had a lot of good people in my life. My mother was a saint. You don't know if you've ever met my mother, but she was a saint. And I'm sure she was a major influence on my life and personality. My Claire Breen, who was a vice principal of Sameness, but also my brother-in-law, and he was a big influence on my life. And Ed Carlin was a big influence on my life. Ed Carlin was the coach of the basketball team, and he really, I think he helped put a lot of people on the straight and narrow, including me, although I don't think I was ever going to waver anyway. And then when I got into orthopedics, the professor in head was Dr. F.P. Patterson, who is a hard-driving guy who didn't suffer fools gladly, but I thought he was the greatest, and he and I got along fine, and I worked hard, and he helped me along, as did many other people in the faculty. And then internationally, there were people. There was a great surgeon from Switzerland who came out to teach here and stayed at my house and taught me a lot about teaching and about what was important and what wasn't, and showed me that all the superficial stuff wasn't important. Like, whether you drive a Mercedes or a Volkswagen isn't important, and whether you have a 8,000-foot chalet or a little cabin is not important. He was very important in that way. And then there were other major people around the world from whom I took note, or of whom I took notice. So, yeah.
Did you have any doubts in yourself or any obstacles that came in the way, and how much you've dealt with those?
Well, I guess I always had doubts, but I never wanted any of this stuff so badly that it bothered me. like I sort of said, well, if I'm good enough to go to medical school, they'll take me to medical school. If they don't think I'm good enough, I'll go and be a teacher. I didn't like apply to 15 medical schools and interview all over the place and that kind of thing. And the same with my orthopedic training. I didn't apply all across the country and try to get into different programs. I just said, if they think I'm good enough, they'll take me. And if they don't, well, I'll do something else. And so I've sort of been like that all my life, I think. If things turn out, they turn out. If they don't turn out, it wasn't to be. So I don't worry about those things too much. I don't think I have sort of driving ambition. I think I just like to do what I like to do, and then I do it. And if it works out, it's fine. Yeah.
Have you been able to find, how have you been able to find a balance in your life when you've been so focused and so many challenges in terms of work? And how can you get a work-life balance?
It wasn't balanced. It was unbalanced. I loved the work. I never considered it work. When I worked at the old Super Value in White Rock, I would go in there at 9 in the morning and be looking at the clock to see if it was coffee break, and then I'd be looking at the clock to see if it was lunch break. When I was working doing orthopedic trauma, I'd be in there at 6 in the morning, and around 6 in the evening, I'd get hungry and say, "Oh, I guess I better go home." I never. It was always so interesting that I never really did that. I think my family suffered compared to some families, I guess, but they turned out all right. And yeah, it wasn't until I almost like retired that I just got balanced. I always played some sports. I played tennis and stuff. I played golf later in my time. Um, and we did some social things, but I was pretty available for work. Let's put it that way.
So you were passionate enough that that was pursuing you and kept you alive and vibrant. And how did your family deal with that? And is it now, you're saying you found more time, not later, to
Well,
work?
they're all grown up now, and were grown up when I retired. But we all have a good relationship, and they're all doing fine. And so whatever happened worked out fine. Uh, I feel lucky in all ways. I feel lucky where I lived when I was a kid. I feel lucky going to the school I went to. I feel lucky, that I was in the right place at the right time. I feel like our generation, yours and mine in Canada, is the luckiest generation that's ever lived in the history of mankind.
Yeah.
I just can't think of any generation anywhere that was luckier than we.
Yeah.
So I'm happy about it. Yeah.
Are there some specifics in terms of your life experiences that were more satisfying or brought you more satisfaction than others, or was it pretty much the whole gamut of things that you were engaged and involved in?
Um, well, I liked almost everything, but I was in my sort of mid to later years in practice. I was quite involved in international teaching, and I was a member of this organization in Switzerland. I was on the board of trustees of this organization in Switzerland, and we used to meet different places around the world. And I met orthopedic trauma surgeons from all kinds of different countries, and I enjoyed that. It was very. Plus, I traveled to a lot of countries, and I taught in a lot of countries. So I would say that was very, very satisfying. It was a bit onerous, but it was very satisfying. And I made friends of these people. And it's nice to, you find out that the people in the world are all the same. I mean, there's idiots in every country, and there's great people in every country. And I happen to run into the great people. So that was very good. Uh, we bought a little house over in Vancouver Island, and that's been a great thing. It's at a little place called Kaibé at Comox, and Comox and Kaibé are very much like White Rock was when you and I were growing up. So it's good for me. It's very relaxing. Uh, yeah, that's good.
You talked about some of the people you've met and taught with and worked with, but I was reading some of the ratings that some of your patients have given you, and it seems as though you had a wonderful relationship with all of your patients along the way as well. And certainly the praise that they have heaped upon you is certainly evident and reflective of your character. And
Yeah, you know, I think I was like everybody else. I had some good ones and some bad ones, and I did some good things and made some mistakes. I think everybody does that. You know, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the work, and I think it made it easier for the patients because they could see that I was happy, and I was also uh, confident about what I was telling them. You know, and I used to joke with them, you know, and I would say things like, are you nervous? And they would say, yeah. And I'd say, well, you don't have to get nervous unless I'm nervous. If I'm nervous, then you have to get nervous. And that would relax them.
I'm sure
Uh,
that would, yeah.
you know, so you know, I had a good relationship with the majority of my patients, and a lot of them were on the what you might call the lower side of society because they're the kind of people who get injured. But you know, I grew up in White Rock, which was a very mixed society, and I knew people from every branch of society, and I could understand them. And I worked, you know, summers I worked in a jail in the summers. I worked in a fish plant. I worked in Canada Customs, so I knew lots of people from different places, and I knew what their work was like. And I did when I was younger. I did house building, and I worked with plumbers and carpenters and roofers and stuff. So I kind of could get along with everybody.
Some of the philosophers have said that it's not what we accomplish in life, but who we are that people remember. And certainly, as you're describing yourself, I think the great accomplishments you have along the way has also a reflective of who you are. And so often we see people who are just stuck on what they're doing, and that consumes them. You certainly have had a holistic approach to that is very endearing to all of us, and we're all very proud of what you've accomplished and what you've done in our community, across the province, indeed around the world.
You know, Gordy, when young people were training with me used to ask for my advice about where they should go, I would say, well, follow your interest. Do what you're interested in. Don't worry about getting the money. I mean, everybody has to have money, everybody has to live, but don't worry about maneuvering your way around and all that stuff. Do what you're interested in. If you're doing what you're interested in and you're good at it, somebody will end up paying you for it enough to make you happy, and you'll be happy. You have to work, you know, a third of your life, a third of all the waking hours of your life, just about, and you know, you might as well do what you're interested in, and then you'll be happy. And that's what I did. I just did what I was interested in.
How has Betty Ann been handling you during your little slower times now?
Oh, we're doing fine. Yeah, we have a lot. Of course, here during COVID, we have a lot of time together. She has her own, you know, interest, which she, of course, developed over the years, and she did some work and stuff. So no, we're doing fine. Yeah.
So I understand you're the golf champion now at Honesty. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened?
Yeah. Well, you see, I'm what's called, I belong to Shaughnessy Golf Club in Vancouver, and I'm what's called the Legends Champion. And what that means is you're over 75. So it's a fairly limited field. And it also means that not many people want to go into that particular championship. There was, I think, 16 total. Um, and I just happened to be playing reasonably well that week that it was on. Um, but the guy I played who'd won it the 2 years before was older than me and a better golfer. But he had something had happened to him. He'd fallen down the stairs or something 2 weeks before, and he'd had a head injury, and it was just recovering, and he was thinking of pulling out, but he thought he'd stay in, and he had won the first. I think he played me in the championship, so he'd won the first. No, sorry, he played me in the semifinals, so he'd won the first two. But his face was all bruised and blue, and he would sit in his golf cart and sort of, you know, rock back and forth as if he was going to pass out. And I barely beat him. I think I beat him, and I think I did. I think I beat him in on the 19th hole. I think we had to have a playoff. I felt, you know, I mean, I felt the guy was going to die on me on the way around. Yeah, but it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Got a nice trophy calling you the Legends champion?
No, there's my name's on some kind of a plaque, but it's it's not one that's on a good display. I think you have to go behind some cabinet down some dark hallway to see it. Yeah.
I trust you've got a picture of it somewhere so that you can look at
Somebody has, I don't, but somebody has. Yeah.
it. So with the wonderful life that you're living and have lived and will be living, what are the things, if you had the power to change some things societally or the practice you've been in, what are the things that in a big picture you'd take time to be able to influence or change if you had the ability to do that in terms of looking at our world and at our community and making it a better place?
Well, that might be a little too deep for me. Um, like everybody, I would like it if people, or maybe not like everybody, but like most people, I would like it if people would treat each other like you and I treat each other, like my mother taught me to treat people. Uh, and I would like the world to be a place where you understand each other, that you're not too greedy, so that people who aren't as lucky as you or as talented as you can get a little bit more. I'd like to have a system where the wealth is spread more evenly. I mean, I like the portion of the wealth I have, but if it was spread more evenly, there wouldn't be such a tendency towards violence. The only thing that's prevented major violence in yours and my time is nuclear weapons. If we hadn't had nuclear weapons, we'd have been fighting with the Russians or the Chinese or Indonesians or somebody who doesn't have anything compared to what we have, because they would want it, and we wouldn't be able to prevent them from trying to get it, except we threaten them with blowing them all up and killing them. So I think if we could head in the direction of trying to raise the whole world to a more even status, instead of a few people, a few countries having so much, and the rest having next to nothing. Because when you go, where you've been, but when you go to these places, I mean, they're pretty awful. I went to Uganda once, and I mean, it was pretty awful. The a young man would come into the emergency room and be lying on the floor on a mat with a broken thigh bone, and he'd get one dose of morphine and one X-ray. And I mean, that to me was an appalling standard of care. But I'm pretty sure he got better care than he would have if he was in a little town. So we need to. The world needs to even things up.
Yeah.
If they don't, there will be a war, a big war.
And I think we're seeing certainly within the United States and the number of the developed countries, that the 1% that has as much as the bottom 20%, and we're seeing that getting the division being larger and larger there, contributing to the kind of challenges that you're suggesting, that many times we've seen wars break out over just that type of separation, and what we're seeing in the United States right now. So,
I think about those kind of things, and I have mixed feelings about it. I kind of think that the Elon Musks and the Bill Gates and those kind of people have done an awful lot for society. Now, do they need to have all the money? I don't know. Bill Gates gives a lot of his away. But I think you're right. There needs to be some way of evening that out without destroying initiative, without destroying the idea that I can build something new and different and exciting. Because a lot of, like, the internet is we're on it, is a pretty special thing. And if people hadn't developed that and hadn't promoted it, and if tech companies hadn't been involved, it wouldn't have been as good. So I sort of struggle with the idea that we ought to cut that stuff off completely. But I think there are a lot that are way too up there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things we've seen in politics is that we always had people who are on the fringes and a bit out there, and now they used to be isolated, but because of the internet, they're now connected, and they're connected within communities and around the world. And they've certainly had an influence in terms of negative approaches to things and making it even more challenging in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like what's going on south of the border. But you know, it's difficult. I mean, I think it's not really our business as Canadians, but it's difficult to watch. I know so many people there.
So you made reference to wherever you've traveled, people are very much the same, and you made reference to sameness around the world. I gave a little TEDx talk on that subject matter, and basically started with saying that wherever we go in the world, most people care about the same things. They care about family and community and trying to get ahead in life. And unfortunately, that those challenges are somebody cut off. But most people care about those things, and those things connect us. It's that sameness that we all have. And I think that your reference reinforces for me that those type of things, if we can get back to that grounding and sameness instead of getting so removed from that, we find the values that will connect us in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. I hope it happens in my children's lifetime or my grandchild's lifetime. But you know, we just have to do what we can to try and be nice ourselves, and I don't mean being nice in a way that's sort of just being nice for the sake of being nice, but just be what I call normal. And other people have a different normal, but there's a lot of people don't have enough confidence in themselves. And I think when they lash out at people, it's because of something they've done or something they feel, not something that the other person has done. And that is something that needs to be taught, I guess. But I notice that a lot, that when somebody is lashing out, it's because of what they think about themselves, not really what they think about the other person.
Certainly, we see that in the criminal justice system all the time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I worked at Haney Correctional, and it was a real eye opener. And those weren't the worst of the people who were on the wrong side of the law, but it was a real eye opener for me.
Well, you've had a wonderful life to date, and lots to do, contributions to make yet. So thank you so very much, Bob, for spending the time and sharing yourself with us. Thank you for joining us today on Community Connections. Please tune in to our next show as more amazing people share their wonderful stories. If you haven't already, please click on the red subscribe button below, right down there, and view our updates. Feel free to leave any thoughts or comments that you may have. We're always trying to do a better job of connecting this wonderful community. Thanks again for joining, and until next time, keep connecting. Thank you.